anyone else have sound or audio? Is it working? Oh, good. Oh, perfect. Yours is in there. All your lesson plans are in there. You can take a copy. There's a copy for all of you, so you have a physical. Yeah, it's Savannah, Emily, Michelle, Willnard, Mason, Taylor, Sarita, Lauren, Greta, and okay. Hi, Harry. Thanks for coming. Help yourself to some food. We have some fruit and bagels. Did you guys know Harry Clark?
No. Hello.
He used to be director of school music, director of bands.
Nice to meet you. I'm Emily.
He plays French horn. French horn player. As hard as she. Doob it out. Doob it out.
My roommates might need your roommates. I was like, I texted all them. No, I don't, but hang on. I said, was there anybody with the flash drive I can borrow for tomorrow? No response. Could have at least said no. That would have been weird. Is that this video?
Okay, you're just like,
Doesn't matter. The picture was supposed to be like, wow.
okay, come on.
Okay, here we go.
A+ picture of Koda. A+. Hair, why do you deceive me?
Well, mine turned out to be 7 days.
Look like I have a rat tail.
Well, not like 7, but it's double space. So. I included lessons in there too. The actual handouts. It's really boring, but it's really interesting.
What?
It's a boring presentation. Like breaks. Where was this at too?
I believe it. I didn't invite you to family. This is the
That's what 8 o'clock. I guess we better get started.
Woo!
Any Mason that's not seeing this thumb drive.
Oh.
Be able to just plug your laptop.
Probably.
She has the input thing. Does that thing work on other people's computers? This?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You can just probably hook up his if it
I mean,
connects.
I transcribed the interview so they could follow with the words. So if the sound doesn't work, they would just read it.
You what?
I transcribed the interview
Uh-huh.
that I did, so I have the words.
Why it's not seeing.
So it's not huge issue.
Oh,
Oh well, I guess. I mean, just in case.
Are we supposed to put our bags in a certain spot?
No.
Alright, we'll just have to do a search if you can't email it. It's not seeing it.
Is your car still being funny?
Yeah, girl.
I had to get my transmission cord flushed. It was like $140.
Oh, wait, it is.
So did you get it?
Yeah.
Excuse you?
It's plus. Is it, which one? Oh, pink.
Yep.
Perfect.
Pink.
Oh,
I still read that as Seagate. I do not read that as Segway.
I thought it was Satan's too.
What? Are you kidding?
Did you say
I
Seagate?
thought it was Satan's the first one. So it's Satan's.
I still read that as Seagate.
Alright.
Oh, why is it doing that?
No.
Woo!
I'm so full.
Hold on, I couldn't get his email. I think he got like 15.
Are we live streaming on me right
I
now?
know.
Yeah.
You're right.
I didn't practice mine either, but it's
No, I
okay.
needed to see something.
Okay, so who is her timekeeper though. Emma is great.
Emily.
Swell.
Hold on, Taylor wanted to try something first, if that's cool.
Oh, yeah, that's
That's fine. It'll work.
I really don't know. I put it on the song.
Okay.
I'm probably going to keep time on my phone to know how long my interactive portion lasts.
I'm looking at a lot of stress out. That's a big coming off what they don't get. And then
Yeah, we told me when it's 7.
That's true. I'll be 6, 8, and I'm done with the whole thing.
Okay.
So what are you gonna do it? So 6 is gonna be 2.
Just
say
say time.
8 is 0.
And then after at 9 minutes, 2. Okay, so what I'm gonna do when you're at 6 minutes, I'm gonna say 2. When you're at 8 minutes, I'm gonna say 0. At 9 minutes, I'm like, you're done. Don't get point taken.
What if you,
Thank you.
But if it's the alarm on your phone.
Yeah, just go like that.
And what if the
Do it
phone
like-
goes off?
like a-
That's a good idea.
Give us like a that way. we
Yeah,
can
like
say-
from what is it, America's Got Talent? That they have the
Well, you should end it.
I mean, if you're a 0,
So I thought I lost. You
you
should be finishing at 0.
that's when you start saying your goodbye. Not at
I'd like to thank my
I
mom.
lost weight.
I thought I lost weight. I literally didn't eat for 72 hours. How did I not lose any weight?
What?
Okay. Uh-oh. Yeah, we live streaming my body.
No, we were trying to
It's all Emily. It's the Emily show.
I was making face.
Okay, so welcome class to your own class presentations. Welcome, Harry Clark. Thank you so much for coming. All right, first we've got Savannah, and Emma is our timekeeper, and she'll give you 2 minutes. That means you're at a 6-minute mark. Remember, you can go up to 9 minutes though. So
Yeah, I'm not going to try that. I'm not testing the waters here. Okay, so hello everyone. I'm talking about songwriting today in the general music classroom. So the main purpose for this for me was basically to get students that are not involved in our large ensembles involved in the music classroom, because everybody deserves music education, and to build their own self-confidence. So something that I was looking at whenever I was trying to find some sources was how songwriting is used in music therapy really often in middle school and also in high school. And I thought that was really amazing how like this songwriting thing that I think is really cool, but I've always been scared to do, is actually something that therapists use to build self-confidence and self-awareness and self-esteem. So when I was trying to think about this project, I thought back to high school and middle school for myself. And actually this picture was the first time that I arranged something in high school, and I was playing the bells and a kick drum, and I was like, we're gonna do this song that I arranged, guys, let's go! So that's where I kind of got the idea, was merging poetry and, you know, your own voice and an instrument maybe. I wrote in my packet, it kind of sounds like suicide, like it just sounds really scary. So trying to figure out how to build this self-confidence in my students that I was too afraid to have myself was something that I thought was really cool. And then after finding that stuff about music therapy, that really taught me what I already knew, that like it was a good thing that we need to have in our schools and in our general music classroom. So, learning outcomes are building composition and arranging skills, building all the musicianship of a student, and then collaborative skills. They'll be working together with other people as they're like covering songs and then doing their own stuff. And then as we all want for lifelong musicianship and learning about the music around them, as well as the music that they want to create on their own. So if you want to open your thing, you can. There's an outline of the syllabus that I showed you guys in class the other day. And basically that outline I made myself. I tried to think back to middle school guitar lessons and what I thought would be the best way to start. So students are working on the instruments simultaneously. They're working on piano and guitar, so they have 2 different ways to visualize these chords. And we'll start in C major, which if you know that F major, or F chord is not easy on the guitar, but if you use Little Kids Rock and the way that they use the F chord, where it's just the last 2 strings, and you only play those 2, then it does start out really easy. And so every week they're working on theory, they're working on composition, they're working on improvisation, they're working on all sorts of different components to build all of the skills as one, instead of just, we're going to work on lyrics for 2 weeks and then we're going to start working on music. No, it all needs to work together so that you don't feel, classroom, especially MUS score, so that they are comfortable with traditional notation. And then YouTube for uploading stuff and critiquing everybody else's, as well as Dropbox if they don't want to share with other people, which I think is perfectly fine. They should be able to work on their own creativity within themselves if they aren't, and they'll share when they're ready. So a couple ideas of how to start this in the classroom, which I think is a little scary in itself. There was something that I got from Pop Rocks, which is Dr. Vassel's pseudonym friend that she was studying, and that she has a survey that they fill out basically talking about their music experiences beforehand. And then there's another thing in your packet about using a thesaurus to find rhyming words and other words that they can use to build their songwriting vocabulary. And just finding a place to start. So starting with a simple story, and then, okay, let's look in the thesaurus and see what you could find, or your phone, or whatever. And then also comparing song lyrics to poetry and breaking down a song they already know. So, please open your packets, and we are going to be doing the interactive portion today. So one of the things that I found was this thing called a song rewrite. So you're taking the melody of a song that you already know, the rhyme scheme, and then all you're doing is overlaying your new lyrics to that. So if you want to take out a pencil, you have a minute, and we can listen to a little bit of the song. And you can write it about breakfast food. I'm giving you your topic. So you can write it, this is my bagel, I love my bagel. So however you want to. So here is a little section of this song here. Please go to the section I want you to go to. That's your rhyme scheme. Great. Okay, so the last thing is 10 helpful hints that I kind of came up with. And a few of these are from one of the sources I put in the back for you. So number one is giving a clear framework. Like I was saying, give a few tools to work with. You don't want to give the entire toolbox and make them scared of the toolbox. And then always encourage having them to tell a story, because that's what songs are about, right? Get compos for the guitar, because then they can be in their first key that they learn and move it around, and they're comfortable with that, and until they're ready, you can take that away. The stars teach by example, so bring in music that they hear on the radio, stuff that they know, and break it down to show them this is why this works, and this is why maybe this doesn't work. Also, use songs that are appropriate in your classroom. That's important. Encourage sharing and collaboration, let them work together. Also, keep a journal about their poetry. Record these improvisation activities that they do. That's really important, so you don't forget what you're doing. And then lastly, as I learned from Beth Wilson, discover a stopping point, because not every composition is going to have, you're not going to feel satisfied with everything. So making sure that they know when to stop, that's great. That's the end. That's basically the end anyway. So the sources are in the back. You have one lesson plan in your thing. You are ready to start a songwriting unit in your school.
How are we on time? Huh? Oh my goodness.
So I think you were fine.
Okay, questions for Savannah. We have 2 minutes for questions. Savannah, how did you, so you have a little bit of experience writing your own music, so how much of that came into play while you were putting together the information?
Kind of. I mean, I thought about, like, you know, arranging is kind of a way to segue into creating your own stuff, which I haven't wrote anything as myself. So, like, I'm already giving myself the tools of, okay, I have this song, so let me edit this to how I need it to fit. So that's kind of how I thought about it. Was like, I'm not even ready to have all the tools yet, so I'm going to make sure that I make it simplified for students.
I think, well, you went to the pop music workshop.
Yeah, that was really helpful.
Yeah.
The Little Rocks thing is, like, really awesome. There's so many resources on there, like, it was incredible.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
And that website, I pulled up the last day of class, that was a Little Kids Rock.
And it's in the
free.
back of your thing, too.
Perfect. Any other questions or thoughts for Mason?
How would you recommend handling teaching students in a classroom with different levels of musical ability coming in? Like, particularly like a student who doesn't know how to play an instrument.
Well, one of the things that I said that I would want as a prerequisite for my classroom is that they've already had some sort of musical experience. So either they've had to have general music, like one other quarter before that, or they've, like, been a church musician, or they're, like, taking lessons outside, because trying to teach notation and, like, music literacy is not really the point. It's more about, like, expanding on those ideas. So you can do it however you want. You just wouldn't be able to cover as much ground.
You can argue, you know, NAFME defines literacy, it's not just written notation. So having oral skills and being able to do all that, that's a form of musical literacy. So it is in there.
Yeah.
It's just maybe what we're not so used to in college.
They just gotta have something. Like, they can't, like, have no basis of music at all. Or at least for me, I think that'd be really hard. So
Good question, Mason. Good. All right, let's get Emily set up.
thanks for that, everybody, for being distracted. Yeah, okay. Oh, fix it.
All right, bringing classical music block to the classroom.
Okay, so I would like you to raise your hand if you have ever performed classical music in your ensemble classroom. Okay, raise your hand if you did classical music in elementary school. That's what I thought. So when I had done observations, I had observed how there was this gap that we start introducing classical music to students later in their ensembles. It's almost like because everybody has to do it so that they get exposed to it. But I wanted to see how it would work with younger students. I work with the piano preparatory program, and there's all of these excerpts of classical music in their book. And just with younger students in a one-on-one setting. So, why choose classical music? Because it's been the music of our past for like over 300 years. It is where we've come from. It is what defines the music of today. It is like the techniques that have come from the past. It is who we are. Just like we teach history in school, we should be teaching classical music to students. And it's not that we have to teach them like our version of music history and they have to learn all these details, but they should be able to make those connections between maybe like Thanksgiving and American folk songs, or like some, I know Charles Ives wrote a song called Thanksgiving, I might not do that one, but still making those connections between what they're learning in class and music, so that you can see that the world is a more multi-dimensional space than just sectionalized. So this is taken from a study that was done in Great Britain with middle school students, and they had noticed that the students just didn't have any exposure. Either they had just heard it or they hadn't heard it as background music, but they didn't really understand the music they were listening to. It's not readily available in media like it is with pop music, that you see the artists, you see the performances, you see the award shows, and then you see them tracked by media. With classical music, most of them are not alive anymore. So it takes more effort for you to put it in context for students and for them to realize that these are people. They just lived in a different time period. So that's where this quote comes from. But this is actually about Kodai, but still, the biggest thing I had noticed is when you give students context and you give them some way to keep them engaged and make it accessible, is that's when you see the music flourish and then be excited. So yesterday I taught a student that I hadn't taught in a year, and they were playing, when I had taught him, we had just learned Ode to Joy, and he loved it so much that he was playing it for this recital. And he tells me, oh yes, I remember you singing this to me in German. And so he was all excited because I taught him another word in German, and he said it the entire time that he was playing piano. So you just see this connection that they see that you're excited about what you're teaching, so then they want to be excited about what you're doing. Another thing I had noticed, especially for younger kids, because this was more for K through 2, is that they're constantly bombarded with stimulus, especially from technology. You see kids with the iPads in front of them, and they're touching, and they make noise, and it's just like flashes of color all of the time, and it's this constant sensory input that doesn't necessarily get translated with classical music, because they don't have music videos, they don't have necessarily videos to go along with it. It's just auditory. So how do you take that audio and transfer it for something that students would be able to relate to and understand and be able to focus on, so that you can teach musical concepts? So that's where I came across these different types of musical play, which came from an article about how do you keep students engaged and how classical music can be successful. So these were the different categories they came up with. In your packet, after my first handout, there's 3 lesson plans. They're all 3 different pedagogies that we teach in our class. So the Kodai, Dalcroze, and Org. And there's 3 examples of each of these. So there's one on kinesthetic movement that you move around to each one of your themes. There's also a dramatic one where you're portraying a troll that in the Hall of the Mountain King, that you are mimicking dynamics and you're moving around. So that way you give students parameters that they know what their goal is, they know, but they're exploring on their own. You're just stimulating them through a certain structure. So you're giving them a dramatic play that they can go off of, and they're still listening to the music, but they're discovering that on their own, and then likewise they're making their own decision whether they like it or not, because they don't have to. It's just giving them that accessibility that they wouldn't have unless they were in the classroom. So these were possible repertoire ideas that I thought of, just from different resources, from my own personal taste. I would have had more Tchaikovsky if it was my own personal taste. But I think the most daunting thing for me when I was planning the repertoire was that because classical music can be very complex and long, how do you put that in a setting for students? How do you take a piece that is 20 minutes long and still make it accessible for students? So I noticed a lot of the Baroque music is shorter, the dance music, and it works well for students because it's lively, they can be interactive, they can move around to it. symphonic works. I also thought about doing like art songs with them, that they're accessible and that you could play along with them. So these are just different ideas you can put in your classroom. And then it also talks about on the sheet that one of the big questions when we did our practice round was, how do you take the repertoire and connect it with these different structures that I listed before? And I think the biggest thing is you look at the musical concepts that you have. You look at the goals you want to achieve, and you see which structure would match best with that. So if you're doing a lesson on form, maybe doing a kinesthetic movement, so you have a movement that goes along with each of the themes. If you're doing a piece that has like really contrasting dynamics, that's very theatrical, then you probably want to do a dramatic one. So that way they matches up with the character of the music. That keeps them engaged, and it will help them understand it. Because this is going to be very new for them. You want to make this as accessible as possible. So, that's it. It goes to the bibliography. It's not letting me go right now. But does anybody have any questions? Oh, I'm so good at this.
What was new for you in developing these lesson plans?
I think it was new just because I didn't get exposed. I did not listen to classical music really until college, and I grew to love it being here. And I think it was new for me is, how do I make this accessible for kids, because I was not a kid listening to this. So how do I make this relatable? And I think it just brought out the teacher in me that just wants to see them excited about what you're excited about, and seeing how much they light up when you are excited. Like, I know that my student thought I was being ridiculous. I'm singing to him in German, but he loved it, and so it worked out, and he still likes it. I think that was probably the most challenging, is how do I put myself in the shoes of a K-2 student and not a college student having to cram for a music history thing. So,
well, what's impressive is that you did these 3 new lesson plans, and you had a 4th one with Michelle that you actually tried out with kids, and that was really successful.
It was fun too. We had fun. Right, Michelle? Yeah, we had fun. And they seemed like they were having fun. They were real excited. They had lots of energy. So,
I hope you use these in student teaching.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
Are there any more questions?
Comments?
Okay, thanks, guys.
Okay, let's get Michelle.
I'm going to try to be connected. Well, I'm going to write it down wrong.
Okay, we've got Michelle and music in urban areas.
Hi, so I'm Michelle. Before I start my topic, I would like to introduce a little bit about myself. So I was born and raised in São Paulo, Brazil, a big city in South America. I am interested in classical music since an early age. In fact, that for a picture is me and my brother coming out of a concert. And after that, I had many opportunities for performing. I sang in a choir, a children's choir, in an opera. That was me. Well, I am very leader. It was after a performance of Hansel and Gretel in the same theater that I watched that performance with my brother. And I also had a lot of opportunities to play with community orchestras since an early age. And I followed my music studies with my primary instrument is violin. In fact, I still play, and I'm still a performer, double majoring here in UK. And I'm a project of what we call social projects. they're basically after-school programs. They're funded by the government. So I never had music education in public school system. So coming here and seeing everything working was really new for me. So my topic is music education in urban areas, which is very related to my musical experiences growing up. And in developing countries like Brazil, music education, as I said, is usually not part of the general education curriculum and an extracurricular activity. But because of that, many people don't see the they don't see that music education programs are extremely beneficial for the society. So for me, understanding the importance of providing quality music education is the first step necessary to start my future profession as a music educator. So having a clear idea of the importance of my future profession will help me to set a clear goal, which is to provide music education to everyone regardless of any social background, socioeconomic background, and cultural background as well. So for part of this project, I decided to use a chapter of the book Not-for-Profit, Why the Democracy Needs the Humanities. And it talks about arts being a necessary part of the general education curriculum. So the chapter emphasizes that arts, like music, dance, drama, can develop critical thinking in children and on social issues too. So they relate the music with social issues like racism, sexism, stuff like that. And they also develop a sense of community with kids because they're working with each other in ensembles and practices and stuff. And kids don't matter about race or culture; they just work with each other, and it's great. And the chapter also has examples of music education programs in the city of Chicago. And Chicago is a very segregated city. There are poor people, rich people all in the same school. And this is very related to my home city of São Paulo, which is the biggest city in South America. So for me, understanding the benefits of providing music education in urban areas will impact my future as a music educator because I want to seek ways to teach in Brazil and share something that I learned here. So my initial idea for this project was to talk about the impacts of Sp17 programs, which is an orchestra program prevalent in South America. I am interested in those programs because they were the core of my music experience. So this is an example of how the program is. So it's a gigantic orchestra. Anyone can come in. No matter, we have like 20 flutes and 2 horns. Parents were coming in, everyone was coming in, and it was always crowded. It was really fun for us to play. Where did it go? Oh, you probably know this. Okay, so the goal of this Sp17 project is to encourage children to promote civic qualities, not only for professional musicians. So in the programs they develop cooperation, empathy, self-discipline, responsibility, rather than, not rather than music, but like together with music. And they also stimulate children to learn from mentors and as well from peers. It gives students agency in defining and producing their culture, so they take pride in their background. I do music. So there was a research that I found about Sp17 programs in the US, which is not very common, but it will be in the future. And it shows benefits of the programs Curitiba. And is also an area of social disparity in Brazil. And the article has ideas and strategies on how to start a new music education program. And that includes starting the programs in university settings with student teachers, which I think is a great idea. Being in touch with the community to see what they like, what their experiences are in music, and for this to happen, like give questionnaires to parents and students, assessing them what they want to learn and stuff like that. And this article inspired my futures as an international student living in the US now, since I want to seek ways to teach, not only here, but also in Brazil. So overall, this project helped me to enforce my philosophy of music education, which is to provide quality music education to everyone, regardless of any background. And I believe this project will help me to connect my instrumental to my general music education skills. And I will increase my passion on spreading the importance of music education for the society. That's it. Any questions?
Michelle, what are some techniques that they use in these community models that you think you could use maybe at a school that doesn't have a music program, an urban school? Like, how would you begin a music program if you moved somewhere?
That was a big part of this project for me. I was thinking about this a lot. I think a good way is, well, we talk a lot about informal learning this semester. I think it's a great way to access students that never had music before. Just have a lesson plan about something that they really like. It can be pop music. I think it's a very successful way to get to like music first, and then assess them what they like and like work with the community that you have, and maybe you can reach more students that way also. Yeah, I think the most important thing is to see what the students have already. It's maybe a lot of times when I remember I taught in Brazil, and I played my violin for a group of elementary school kids. Most of them didn't know what a violin was, and they never see an instrument before. So, yeah, those kind of kids, they're harder to access. So, like, yeah, give them questionnaires, ask them questions all the time, access them as much as you can, I think.
Any other comments, questions from Michelle? Okay, we've got Will Nard next. Emma, how was the timing? Yes, perfect. And I missed Emily's. How's Emily's? So perfect. You guys are nailing it. I didn't need it. Do you need presenter view?
I'm sorry.
Do you need presenter view? Are you okay?
I'm okay. I'll just.
Okay. Will Nerd has a separate packet. Just if you didn't grab it, it's a printer.
Sorry guys, I was a little slow and.
Hey, Dr. Hudson. Okay. Dr. Hudson needs a handout. Okay, Will Nard.
So good morning, everyone. I'm Will Nard Anderson, and so the purpose of this study was really to investigate the applications and usefulness of Dow-Prose arrhythmics, Kodai method, and Orff-Schul work. Approaches in the choral context, including the ways in which they help shape the philosophical, pedagogical, and musical outcomes of the choral pedagogy and practice. So I personally have a vested interest in how different teaching techniques impact the choral classroom, both in the amount of skills a teacher gains from knowing multiple approaches and the student's ability to learn learn and appreciate music in different ways. So the three most prominent approaches of music education, as you can see, are Dow prose eurythmics, the Kodai method, and orchestral work. So before we even really dive into these three approaches, we must ask ourselves a few questions. So what is the instrument of a choral classroom to begin with? Is it the voice, or is it the collection of voices? If yes, then we as choral conductors will primarily engage with voice building and the project of bringing unique and various sounding voices together. Or is it the mind? Do we appeal to the choristers' sense of reason, their calculation or imagination? Or perhaps is it the eye to aid in music literacy? Or the ear to audiate the pitch? What about the body and the person in social and cultural context of the classroom? Perhaps the most apt description of the choral instruments adopts a more holistic view, one in which the instrument as a whole body entity, you have the mind, the body, the ear, the personhood, and all the cultural experiences. If this is the case, then what pedagogies best capture the capabilities of the whole body as it relates to choral singing? Personally, I believe it's Dow prose eurythmics. So this is an approach established by Emil Dow Prose himself, and it is inclusive really of all of his teachings. It is a whole body approach to learning music, specifically through rhythm, responding, and creating, but most importantly, it stems from his belief that music education had lost its connection to key qualities of musicianship, such as ease, flow, and nuance. So the foundation of Dow prose eurythmics are eurythmics, solfege, and improvisation. So Dow prose may be applied in the classroom in three different ways, something you call quick reaction activity, inner singing, and group choreography. So a quick reaction activity is normally at the very beginning of the rehearsal, and that could be something as move around the room to the accompaniment. You really want it, it's really quick reaction, really trying to just see the kids in action, up and moving and responding to the music. Inner singing could be them simply being more so stationary and they listen to what you're playing and they have to internalize. Or let's say you're playing a melodic line and you ask them, sing for me what you believe the last note should be. So you obviously play, and you may end on T, you say, what is the last note? What should the last note be? And they would normally sing do. And also group choreography, that would be more so putting movement to text. So if you could do some word painting. Let's say you're singing a song that is very colorful. You can try to match movements with the text and have students share ideas with one another. So the Kodai method is an approach of all the teaching concepts of Zoltan Kodai. This is actually really the only approach up here where he himself did not actually set out this approach. He actually is really just based off of the collective works of his teaching. So conceptually, Kodai had many principles for music education, and just a few are music education should begin as early as possible. Education should be based on singing, since he believes that the voice is the primary instrument. Music should be taught on the basis of the mother tongue in the original language. That's very important. Music should be taught every day, and only quality music. So just a few components of the Kodai method are the three P's: prepare, present, and practice. Also singing, folk music, as I've already said, solfege, but he loves the movable do, and also using the curling hand signs, and improvisation. So, and using the Kodai method in the classroom, let's say folk songs that could be implemented are This Old Man here in America. So preparing includes the musical experiences. It includes rote singing, iconic representation, such as circles possibly denoting or representing a whole note, or triangles representing a quarter note. Presenting includes guided discovery and use of those symbolic representations through labeling. And practicing includes the application of those situations, creativity, and writing. So while learning the example described, students may be able to use solfege and hand signs while also improvising. Oh my goodness. Improvise. Oh wow. Is that kind of one, y'all? Also while improvising. Oh my Lord. And prophesying. Oh Lord. Yeah. So what is Orff Show work? It kind of translates to schoolwork or the work of the children, and it is a pedagogy to organize the elements of music through speaking, singing, playing, and dancing. Genau Keatman was an outstanding Gutherschule student, so a student of his at first who became his collaborator and really helped create the characteristic styles of Orff music with Orff himself, with Karl Orff. So Orff began with rhythm, normally as the basic musical element for music, dance, speech, combining. They're all unifying them into one language. And a few of his basic objectives were to use speech and movement natural to the student as the springboard for musical experiences, to encourage the feeling of speech, movement, play, as one to cultivate the musical imagination, both rhythmic and melodic, thus to develop the ability to improvise. So a few components of Orff Show work is improvisation, exploration, imitation, and notation. So while there is minimal text really on Orff Show work, in the choral setting, I was able to come up with a few, and those are just a few, but I'm actually going to start wrapping up. You can start using body percussion and instruments and all these other things. Out of all of these, I found there were many strengths and weaknesses of all of them, but who in here has, based off just what I've explained, has truly, if you're cognizant, have used all three approaches in a choral setting? You personally, whether you possibly taught it, but more specifically in your high school or something? I did not think so. So as we may have witnessed by now, there are so many benefits and risks to having a choral classroom that implements various musical approaches to learning music. All of the approaches are great for creativity and creative thinking. Down-pros, rhythmics, and codi's biggest weaknesses, I think, really lies in the application, where teachers are moving simply for movement's sake and not with intent and purpose. And yes, so. Okay.
Is that 9 minutes? Okay. Was that a question, Greta, or a?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay.
I'm gonna wait for time. Sorry. Okay, so I can see how all of these can really apply to high school core classroom. I was really surprised to find that. And the first time, weakness I thought was time, which you covered. But another thing that I thought about was, would you foresee having difficulty specifically getting high school students to participate in the movement activities of Down-pros and kids too juvenile, and how would you handle that?
Actually, believe it or not, Down-pros, out of all of them, are the most used all across the nation. Just because I personally have not, but it kind of makes sense. Because, and this is on all levels, not just for younger children. Down-pros is the most used. So what I've seen most, how it has been implemented, is more so partner work. So let's stand here together. What does this phrase, how does this phrase go? It's more so phrasal structure. So Down-pros, more than all of them, actually Orff Show work is the most difficult. I barely found any information just because it's so time consuming, and there's so many elements from storytelling to instruments. With movement, with the Down-pros, it's much easier because you could try to do a lot of movement based off the text that is already there, based off the phrase structure. It's really about using the body as a primary instrument instead of just the voice, because if you use it views movement the most important because they believe it's just like a study from Texas, like from northern Texas or whatnot, university study was done, and a lot of the students were singing flat. So one of the ways, never said the word flat, the teacher just kind of instructed or asked the students, how do you think this phrase should sound? And they were moving, they got in groups, and the pitch just went up. So Dow pros more than any of the other ones actually are used a lot more in the country than like I said, that too. So,
Yeah,
surprisingly.
Several of you went to that Dow Crow's workshop. I think you were at that one. Yeah, so they're singing in that, and I wish more people would use it. I think it's really helpful, and yeah, it is easiest. It's just
one thing that I did find though, that's a good question still, got it. Even with that research, and Dow Pros is used more so than any other approach. It's usually at the beginning of the rehearsal and for warm-up purposes. It's still not yet really a tool for truly like learning music. It's more so learning rhythm. Now, I mean like the music on the sheet, but it's still learning music through the movement of through filling in the pitches in your body, for filling the rhythm in your body, but actually reading music, it still has not even studies. So that would be interesting to find.
so all of you start using it, start writing about it. Then we'll have more resources. Thank you. Yeah.
Say it again.
Okay, thank you, Leonard.
Thank you.
Oh, that's it.
I know, I was going to say something. I know, it's up to so that you want to present.
I'm happy to see you, but next time.
All right.
Dr. Sigues.
Mason's is pretty in pink.
It is pretty in pink. I want to go as color pop. Alright, well thank you all so much for coming. My name is Mason Rice, and I'm super excited to share the topic of my study with you all. So the big idea is transitions, and by transitions what I mean is getting from point A to point B in your lesson plan in a smooth and efficient way as possible. So I focused on this topic because I think we've all had that experience, maybe not in front of the classroom, but certainly in the classroom when everyone is engaged, everyone is focused, and everything is seems to be going the right way. So I wanted to tackle this issue so I could incorporate more ways in my teaching to have more of those moments. And the inspiration for this presentation comes from Mr. Jeremy Howard. I took this picture from his Facebook, so it's totally fine. He teaches at Christ the King School, K-8 General Music and Choir. So transitions are a way to keep students engaged. There we go. If you are able to create a creative way of connecting two pieces of your lesson plan, students are more likely to have fun, to be more engaged, and make the lesson more memorable. So we already know that whenever you're watching a master teacher, it always seems like stuff just flows out of them, right? There's nothing awkward. Well, there may be a little awkward things, but they always recover super well. They know exactly what they're doing, and it comes out of them almost effortlessly. So what I wanted to do was to try to replicate that sense of seamlessness in a way in my own teaching. And scripting creative transitions is a way to work towards that educational fluency. So transitions have three major, or good transitions, I would say, have three major benefits of being used in the classroom, which are they maximize your time, and they encourage imaginative play in K-5 students, and they prevent discipline issues. So, like I said, a lot of my inspiration for this project comes from Mr. Jeremy Howard, and I took some time and I interviewed him, and I have a little clip of that.
I started using transitions mainly because with only seeing kids twice a week, 30 minutes each time, I needed to make sure I get as much time between music as possible. So those transitions can serve purpose of being an extra focus on literacy, getting a chance to read some more music, do some oral training, without them realizing that's what you have.
Right, so like you just said, there's there's another benefit still. You can use transitions in an artful way to assess where students are in their music literacy reading skills and reinforce some of the things you were teaching in the songs already. I have another clip from Jeremy Howard.
Well, besides the literacy transitions, which give you a chance to focus on more literacy skills, you can also do the transitions that focuses on imaginative playing. So you connect one song to another song through something thematic. And for example, Bobby Shaft was going to see Silver Bubbles on the sea. He'll come back in there and be Bobby Shaft. Well, why did he go across the sea? He went to go get her an apple for the best apple tree in the orchard in England. Apple tree, and it's a way to connect everything so students have an investment in the stories.
Jeremy would probably die if he knew that I put that in. But he sounded wonderful, so I put it in there anyway. So I sent class a couple of sources to back up my point, so it wasn't just off track. So my favorite quote is, minimizing your prominence and maximizing student participation can eliminate problem conditions. Okay, that's what we want. We want students to be able to be making music as much as possible in these lessons. So minimize teacher time, maximize singing time. And if they're engaged in your lesson, then they're not going to be worried about behaving badly because they're going to be singing. Okay, so there are three major types of transitions. You have your verbal transitions. Oh my goodness, there we go. You have your non-verbal transitions and your literacy transitions. And you also have your PowerPoint transition. So verbal is exactly what it sounds like, right? You have your directive verbal, which is almost exactly what you would think when talking about this. Now we're going to move to this, or now we're going to do this. Now, that's not all that directive is. You can also use it in a singing context. So if we're singing Love Grows Under the White Oak Tree, love grows under the white oak tree, please get in a circle before I count to 3. 1, 2, 3. You know what I'm saying? So you can move, you put words into the songs that you're already using, and students are going to go, oh, it's your go. We're going to run to a circle, okay? Also, thematic, this is my favorite. What you can do is you can take one piece and connect it to another by creating some sort of storyline. So for example, if we're singing Bow Wow Wow, Bow Wow Wow, whose dog art thou? Little Tommy Tucker's dog, Bow Wow Wow. Well, why was Tommy Tucker's dog out in the yard barking? Because he saw a black snake. Oh, goodness. There we go. Black snake, where are you hiding? Right? So I've connected these two pieces, and just by saying that, the students know that this is where we're going next. Because we've done this piece before, and they're ready to move on. So to nonverbal cues, this is also really self-explanatory. So we sing things like this, right? 0, stop talking, please shut up, okay? So what Jeremy Howard